So welcome to the Malaysia Pavilion, and we need to speak loud and clear because we're competing with one of the biggest economies next door, but we can always out-talk them, right? So our volume's up. Right. So today we have a very exciting session, something probably extraordinary for all of you, but so critical, talking about safe and just boundaries. And my fellow hosts here, Aditi and Jane Madrick, the CEO, will join us later. We'll also say a few words.
Thanks, Jamila. Thanks, Jamila. I hope you can all hear me. It's wonderful to be here. And as Jamila says, the title of today's program suggests that the focus would be on how we break the silos to address the planetary crisis and the impact on health. So on behalf of all of us from the Global Commons Alliance, I just wanted to introduce us. We're a growing coalition of scientists, philanthropists, and also businesses and innovators who are enabling collective action to safeguard the global commons. Our mission is to mobilize citizens, companies, cities, and countries to accelerate systems change and become better guardians of the global commons. From the Arctic sea ice to the Amazon rainforest, from critical ocean currents to our freshwater network, the global commons support the well-being of all of us and life on Earth. But human actions have now pushed the commons out of balance. And the climate, biodiversity, nutrient cycle, all of which my colleague Wendy will explain in much better detail than I will, are already beyond the safe and just boundaries identified by science. And this is having devastating impacts on nature, harvests, homes, livelihoods, and people's lives. So safeguarding the global commons is urgent, and it is possible. It requires a different kind of global effort, and that's why the Global Commons Alliance exists. It's a collaboration, a different radical collaboration of diverse actors who are together safeguarding the global commons. So yeah, I'm very pleased to be here and be joined by my colleagues Wendy and also Jane Madgwick, the Executive Director, who will join us for closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Without further ado, let me introduce not just someone so critical to this entire COP28, someone who's worked tirelessly to bring health to the agenda of COP28, but also my very dear friend, Dr. Maria Neira. She was a former health minister of Spain and is currently the director in the Department of Public Health, Environment, and Social Determinants of Health, who will say a few words. Please, Maria.
Thank you very much. I don't want to make any marketing announcement, but I'm afraid at the end of the day, if these guys keep like that, you might need a kilo of aspirins. So I hope maybe we need to give them as well. Let me be very, very, very short. Few years ago, we realized that the 3rd of December, it was my friend Jamila's birthday. So we said, what can we do to celebrate that on a spectacular way, something that everybody will remember? And we said, okay, let's have a health day at COP. So since then, we have been working, but not to make health at the center of the climate change agenda, no, to celebrate your birthday. So thank you very much for that. Well, obviously, we had a lot of motivation to be where we are now. We started working on this with a few people. The group was growing over the years, making sure that the health argument, not only the health argument, the health voice will be very much loud and clear here at the COP by the negotiators, but at the same time using the health argument. I think we have plenty of positive health arguments that can be used to further motivate the little ambition and the very slow speed that we see until now. That is why we use a kind of Troja horse, you know the Troja horse, where you put your people inside, And over the years, slowly but slowly, going to many meetings around the world and saying, hi, I am from WHO. And they were looking at us and say, who? And I say, yes, who? Yes, who? And the presidents of the COPs looking at us say, nice people, lovely, but what are you doing here? What the health people is doing here? Well, now we are not only here, our lungs are very big here at the Health Pavilion. I'm sure you saw it. And finally, on the 3rd of December, to celebrate Jamila's birthday, we have an amazing historic health day. But this is thanks to all of you to support and everybody putting together all of this effort. More than 50 ministers of health here, a health declaration signed by 127 countries. Do you think this is enough? No. If you ask me, Maria, are you satisfied? No. I mean, this is just to the beginning. We are inside. This is irreversible. The next step, I want something very, very simple, and I hope you will agree with me. What I want the next year is using health indicators to measure whether or not they are taking the right decision. Is this something, I think it's normal, isn't it? This should be the way to negotiate. And we are keeping saying as well, since a few months ago, we are saying that we are here with a very strong health voice to remind everyone something very, very simple. They are not negotiating just the percentage of emissions that they need to reduce. They are here negotiating about our life, our health. If they take the right decision, we can have a reduction, an enormous reduction in the number of deaths caused by exposure to air pollution. You know, Malaysia and many other countries in Asia are suffering this disgrace of having extremely high levels of pollution. As the health community, we need to make sure that everyone will hear us. No one in this COP can live here saying, I didn't know that climate change was affecting our health. This is out of question. No excuses. And the second part are the prescriptions. You know, here you are talking about boundaries. There are no boundaries for public health. This is the only boundary that we need to destroy completely. The rest, we need to put boundaries to what the human are doing to our nature and to our ecosystems. One of the first prescriptions that WHO did after the COVID-19, just a few months later, we did a manifesto for a healthy and green recovery that I like very much. I still think is extremely relevant. And we were looking at 6 prescriptions. And the first one was exactly that. As the health community, we are telling you, stop fighting with nature. This is the base for public health. This is the base for all of us. So I hope that all of you will be going around with this prescription of stop the destruction of the biodiversity, the ecosystems, the deforestation, aggressive agricultural practices, because everything is about human health. And if you tell people around that what we are discussing here is about their lungs, their health in general, I think this is the most powerful engine motivation for finally accelerating all of us. Somebody asked me recently on an interview a few months or whatever about, they say, but can you demonstrate the impact of climate change on health? I say, well, we have tons of science. Yeah, but specifically because we need to develop as well. I say, can you demonstrate to me that air pollution is good for human health? Because we need to stop as well to hear all of these absurd arguments that we need to demonstrate that this is good for health. Can you do the other way around? Can you demonstrate that having tons of plastic in the oceans is good for health? Can you demonstrate that having toxic air is good for health? Do it. If you do it and you are very persuasive and you have science, maybe we are all wrong. But for the time being, I don't think it's the case. So let's go for something very ambitious. Next year, we will have indicators, and those negotiators need to look at our human health to prove that they are good or they are bad. Thank you very much. And happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you, Maria. And I know Maria has to leave. But thank you for making time to be with us, Maria. And I'll see you when I see you. So we're going to move on to the science, why we're here today, to talk about safe and just boundaries. And it gives me so much pleasure to introduce two amazing women scientists, Wendy Broadgate, the Executive Director of Earth Commission, and the Global Hub Director in Sweden of Future Earth, as well as Professor Christy Eby, who is the Professor of Global Health and Environment and Ocean Health Sciences at the University of Washington. So I'm going to, who's going first? Wendy, please, go ahead. If you want to walk around, you can take the...
Okay. Do you want a mic or do you want... I can use this, thanks. Thank you, Jamila, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And it's great to see everyone here and to be talking about the relevance of Earth system, safe and just Earth system boundaries for health. Let's see if this clicker works. Yes. So, yes, nothing new here. I'll be sharing the stage with Christy Eby, who is our health expert. So what's the Earth Commission? It's the Earth Commission that has brought together the results that I'm about to show. So the Earth Commission is a group of about 20 experts underpinned by several working groups of experts. There's about 60 scientists involved altogether. It's led by Johan Rockström, Joyita Gupta, and Kinder He from China. And our mission is to define safe and just Earth system boundaries for the planet. As Aditi very kindly introduced at the beginning, this is the scientific component of the Global Commons Alliance, underpinning the quantitative reasons why we need to look after the Global Commons and what are the limits that we should not surpass so that our Global Commons are supporting a healthy and a thriving life on Earth. Ultimately, the Earth Commission's work is designed to underpin science-based targets for nature, so science-based targets for similar to the Paris Agreement, but for water, biodiversity, nutrients, and the other elements of the Earth system that support life on Earth and keep the Earth both stable and resilient. And it's also the scientific component of the broader alliance, which has action groups and communications groups really working to drive change, to have us live within the Global Commons. So the Global Commons Alliance mission to mobilize cities, companies, citizens, and countries to accelerate systems change and become better guardians of the Global Commons. So humans are the biggest driver of change on the planet. These are the great acceleration graphs that many of you have seen before. I was one of the originators of these graphs from the International Geosphere Program. They show in red the drivers of change, the socioeconomic drivers of change from 1850, pre-industrial, until 2010. And in green, the effects on multiple parts of the Earth system, where in pretty much every case we have an exponential increase in both the pressures and the responses on the Earth system around the 1950s. And these graphs and this phenomenon has been one of the underpinning theories of why we are in the Anthropocene, where humans are the biggest driver of change on the planet. And the collection of graphs really helps us realize the gravity of the situation, that we really need to act. These graphs, exponential degradation of the Earth system, cannot continue indefinitely, and we need to act. These changes are also, in particular, the effect of climate change, are leading us to be heating the planet and moving towards multiple tipping points in the Earth system. And there's about 17 tipping points in the Earth system that have been defined to date. And the four big ones that are in the big red balls are those that are at high risk of tipping if we surpass 1.5 degrees. And as we heard already at this meeting, we're now on a trajectory for overshooting 1.5 degrees. This is a very serious situation. And we really need to act very radically to minimize that overshoot because we go into the danger zone. The big tipping points that are at risk of 1.5 degrees are the extinction of tropical corals and the melting of the ice caps and the melting of the boreal permafrost. And those, in turn, can have knock-on effects on other tipping points in the Earth system. This is new areas of science. There are uncertainties, but these are big risks that we're taking with our planet, and we really need to be acting to avoid those risks. So in summary, we're deep in the Anthropocene, we're rapidly approaching tipping points, and we're undermining Earth's life support systems. And this is causing major injustices worldwide, and also, as you well know, problems for human health as part of those injustices. So that's why the Earth Commission set out their mission to define safe and just Earth system boundaries for resilience and human well-being. And whilst the planetary boundaries have been done for a safe, resilient planet in the past, actually incorporating justice on the same units and in the same metrics, it has been the big challenge we've set for ourselves, in addition to looking at other relevant science than the planetary boundaries for defining this safety. So, where did we land? We landed in quantifying the conditions for the Earth and everything that thrives on it for climate, biosphere, water, nutrients, and pollution on the same metrics for both safe and just. The safe boundary is to maintain a resilient and stable Earth system, and the just has two components. One is to minimize the exposure of significant harm to humans. This is often a health issue, but it also can be an issue relating to extreme events and risks to your physical safety. And there's also an access component that I won't talk about today, but the second justice component is having access to resources for a decent life. So thinking about water, electricity, basic needs for a decent life. That is also part of the justice. And then we define the safe and just boundary as the more stringent of the two boundaries. So I won't go into the technical details here, but ultimately these are the safe boundaries with their units, and I can give you some examples. We have climate up at the top, then we have two components for nature and biodiversity, both wild nature and managed nature. We have two components for freshwater, surface runoff and groundwater, and two for nutrients, so basically fertilizer excess, and then one for aerosol pollutants. And in each case, if I take the managed nature as an example, our safe boundary is that we need more than 20 to 25% of human-dominated land area to be intact per square kilometer. And so having nature throughout cities, throughout urban areas, throughout managed areas is important for pollination, for human well-being, and for also for having enough nature to keep our ecosystems healthy. And unfortunately, we have crossed all of these apart from the aerosol boundary, so we're outside of the safe space for a resilient and safe, stable planet. Then the just boundaries have been where we took minimizing the exposure of people to significant harm from Earth system change. We have three components to this significant harm justice based on interspecies, intergenerational, so within today's people, and also intergenerational, between now and future generations. And again, the just boundary is shown in blue, and in the case of the green boundaries, safe and just are at the same level. In the case of aerosols, climate, and surface nitrogen, the just boundary is a tighter boundary. So we have a smaller safe operating space of the green safe operating space to live within. And as I said, we have breached most of those boundaries. It's only the aerosol boundary that we haven't breached at a global level. So we're outside of the safe and just safe operating space. And if we look at a more local level, we've transgressed these boundaries in 52% of the land area of the planet. That's where 86% of the population live. So we're not in a very safe zone. And I would now like to turn to Christy to give you a little bit more granularity about what this means for human health.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for coming today. Really delighted to see all of the interest. And so, as Wendy said, I'm going to talk just briefly about health, and we'll talk more about human health and well-being when we have the discussion later on. All of you know how critically important ecosystems are to our health and well-being. And this is just a further articulation of that importance, but adding in the dimensions of looking at safe and just. So not just saying that we know that they're important, but we're talking now about how they're important, and ultimately how we can tie that to action. And so you see just a few examples of how the flooding events, so many of you experienced flooding events in the last year, the pollinator loss that's happening in so many locations. Can you hear me in the back? More or less? Great. It's tough, I know. Fresh water. We wouldn't be anywhere without fresh water. Everyone's spending this week making sure they've got access to fresh and safe drinking water. We need it for our ecosystems. We need it for us as well. Dr. Niara is not here, but she would talk about the WHO standards, for example, for fresh water, because there are standards for several of these through the World Health Organization to make sure that we do protect people. Nitrogen and phosphorus, we're well past those boundaries. Fertilizer use has created problems around the world, and you can see some of this listed here of harmful algal blooms. We're seeing the kinds of blooms you see in that particular photo. Of course, with these emissions, we're also seeing increases in greenhouse gases and aerosols, illustrating that these Earth system boundaries are deeply interconnected, although this version of the Earth system talked about just these boundaries individually. Eutrophication is going on in so many places and reducing further freshwater availability for humans and for animals and for plants. Lots of work that needs to be done to make sure that we've got safe groundwater for all. The aerosol boundary is really focused on the monsoon, but we also know that aerosols are critically important for human health and well-being. This, for anyone who works in air pollution, this is a not surprising map, but it's the first time that we've got a map like this that shows the intersection between the concentrations of air pollution and poverty. The harm boundary was mostly focused on poverty. It's very difficult to quantify harm on the same metric that you're quantifying the Earth system boundaries. So the focus was on poverty, and this illustrates very powerfully where the challenges lie. We can use this information, as Wendy said, to develop science-based targets. And these are targets for not only the World Health Organization, but more importantly, for industry, for businesses, for communities, to make sure that they understand the risks that they're facing and understand what the options are to move forward to really reduce the challenges we have today and make our future more resilient and environmentally sustainable. We know that science-based targets work. These are just some examples of targeted emissions. And you can see on the left-hand side, if you can see the slide, the knowledge gaps in this cross-scale translation. And there's work going on how do you then translate these safe and just boundaries into specific targets, just like we've done here through the Paris Agreement. We're looking forward very much to questions. I ran through that kind of quickly because it's always more interesting to have questions. than to listen to people talking. So I'll turn it back. Is that right? And then we're going to have the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I hope that all of you have, really appreciated the very compelling argument that Wendy and Christy has presented to us. These are based on facts and figures and lots of detailed research. So we're going to now go into a panel that will be moderated by none other than Malaysia's pride and joy, our youth journalist, award-winning journalist, Ushar Daniel. And she will be joined by Christy. So you need to get up again for your Q&A. And also, give me a minute. Okay, we've got Dr. Courtney Howard here with us from Canada. I can tell you lots about Courtney, but I think she wants to be known as an emergency physician from Yellowknife. But I learned so much from Courtney all the time. And we have my dear friend Musonda, Dr. Musonda Mumba, who's the Secretary General of the Ramsay Convention on Wetlands. And of course, you have me. So, Usha, you want to take a seat?
Yes, I think I'll take over the mic now. Doctor? First and foremost, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at this wonderful panel session. Before I begin, let me introduce myself, although I was already introduced with high regards. My name is Usha Daniel. I'm a climate and environmental journalist from Malaysia. And first and foremost, I am extremely proud to be on stage with wonderful women. It is wonderful to see that this is an all-women panel. An event as well. And I think we are so accustomed to the panels, and it's really refreshing to see just women experts on stage with me. And without further ado, I think I'd like to start with before I start with the question, this is going to be a sharing experience on how we can break out of working in silos and approach discussions and actions on planetary health through a systems approach. So this panel is not just a sharing session on stage, because I would like to welcome questions from those present on the floor today. So if you have any questions, I kindly request you to just put up your hand. I'm quite sure someone will be running around with a mic. Introduce yourself and let us know where you are from. And we wholly welcome questions from the floor. Without further ado, I think I'd like to kick off this session with my first question to Dr. Jamila Mahmood. It took her by surprise. So my first question, Doctor, is how can planetary health serve as a unifying framework to address the interconnected challenges of human health, environmental sustainability, and social equity on a global scale?
So first of all, what is planetary health? So in simple words, I always say planetary health is a silo-busting approach to addressing the dangerous changes of the planetary destruction and its impact on human health and well-being. And I think that what it is really about looking at health. And when I mention health, we have to be aware that the determinants of health are not in the health sector. Only 25% are in the health sector. 75% of the determinants of health are economic, social, environmental, behavioral, and definitely political. So if we are going to address health, we've got to take a multi-systems approach to then address those drivers that have been presented by Wendy and Christy so eloquently to be able to attain health of human civilization. And that includes animals and plants and everything else, and culture as well. So how we address the challenges we face today must then shift from I only do this as a ministry to what do I do with another ministry or another agency or another company that will actually address the problem that we have and put that on the table. Now, is that impossible? No, it's not. Because my country, Malaysia, is already embarking on developing a national planetary health action plan. And it will be ready by next year. And many people in this room are already in it. I know Prof. Adeline is here. Usha is also part of it, myself, Oliver, and a few others. But what we will do is, speak to a wide range of stakeholders to say, if we want to have good health, recognizing all those drivers I mentioned, what needs to happen? What are the shifts that need to happen? And therefore, intense and radical collaboration will be required. Now, I think fundamentally, we need an education revolution. I think that until and unless our future generations understand why this is critical for their survival, I will not be here in 2050. Right? So at our university in Sunway, we've done something pretty radical. From 2024, it will be mandatory for every undergraduate to complete a 7-week course in planetary health before they can even graduate, which means we want them as future leaders, before they sign on those dotted lines, whether they're going to be a corporate leader or public policy leader or NGO leader or an academic or an entrepreneur, they understand their decisions have impact on the planet and on health. And I think that also the other fundamental thing is communications, right? People hardly understand what is 1.5. If you're an Uber driver or a fisherman on the coast, you don't really get it. How do we now transform the beautiful science that we have and the evidence into information that is well understood? And I think this is where science translation into common language using TikTok and others is going to be critical. So I talked about education, about communications, governance will be key, and this is why at highest policy level and political will, and finally, we need to bring the private sector in. We need to talk to people who we are uncomfortable with, and they need to talk to us.
Thank you very much for that answer, Dr. Jamila. And I think I'll move on to the next question for Dr. Courtney. Dr. Courtney, my question for you is, how does planetary health intersect with other disciplines, such as public health, environmental health, and what unique contributions does it offer?
Thank you. And I'll try to answer this as diplomatically as I can. For me, planetary health is the frame that integrates all of those. So when I'm talking to people about global health, generally speaking, I'm like, okay, well, you've learned a lot and you know a lot, but you've kind of forgotten about our ecological foundation upon which all of this rests. So I love planetary health, and it's just so lovely to be here. This is sort of Jamila has such an incredible level of change-making power, like to have already convinced the government to make a national planetary health action plan and to have already made it a mandatory course. Like I'm just like doing check boxes about what I need to make happen back in Canada. It's really impressive. So I am an emergency physician. I live in the subarctic in Canada. I serve a patient population, majority Indigenous, that extends all the way up to the high Arctic. So the territory that my hospital covers is greater than the size of France and Spain combined. I live in the home of the only CT scanner. And so the patients in the high Arctic are already dealing with temperatures over 3 degrees Celsius warmer than when an elder was born. So when I learned in 2009 that climate change was the biggest health threat of the 21st century, I happened to learn it in Inuvik. And so I looked up and I said, did you know that climate change is the biggest health threat of the 21st century? And they said, no, but you know, my cousin went through the ice the other day because it isn't stable anymore and it's making it more difficult to hunt. There's food security problems. It's making us sad because the landscape looks completely different than it used to. And so, of course, now we have had terrible wildfires this summer. My territorial capital of Yellowknife, we actually had to evacuate. So this 100-bed hospital, we required a military operation to evacuate all the patients to 2 different provinces. So we're talking greater than 1,000-kilometer flight distances. That was the minimum flight distance. So we're already experiencing huge disruptions. So because we sort of are at really the front line of this rapid climate change, it became very clear. When you live on permafrost, it's very, very clear that your foundation is shifting and you need to do something about it. So I started figuring out how do I make change? And I was very bad at it because they don't teach you how to do that in medical school. And gradually, we realized with the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment that when we connected people's health to the health of the planet, it made a positive unifying narrative that helped us get things done. So we participated in supporting the Canadian accelerated phase out of coal by saying, I have a stethoscope in my bag. We are well known for wearing stethoscopes at press conferences. And so you get there and you say, hey, let's phase out accelerated coal-fired, let's have an accelerated coal-fired phase out so we keep kids out of the emergency department with asthma. And we produced documents that showed how many less asthma exacerbations we would have. It worked. So we got a commitment in Alberta, which is our most conservative province, did the same thing nationally. And then that let Canada co-found the Powering Past Coal Alliance with the UK. And they're continuing to catalyze this internationally in association with the Global Climate and Health Alliance, which I'm now the vice chair. So this is a narrative that works. And then we did the same thing with the national price on carbon, basically the same. Let's keep kids out of the emergency department with asthma. If we put this price on carbon, it will decrease air pollution this amount. I got pulled in by an economist because he's like, nobody wants to listen to me talk about carbon taxes. And so this well-being oriented frame helps to get the social scientists into the same room as the natural scientists, into the same room as the health scientists, all pointing in the same direction, using health as a unifying desire. We were at a session this morning and they had just done a ton of research, and apparently across the world what people most want is for their families to be safe. So the planetary health frame allows us all to speak together, to concentrate on a unified goal, and all of the work that Christy has shown us and Wendy has shown us helps us figure out what that is. So it's just a delight to be here with so many of my heroes, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Courtney. My next question is for Professor Christie. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation earlier. And my question for you is, what are the key challenges that planetary health aims to address, and how do they impact human health as well as the environment?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And somebody signaled to me if you can't hear me in the back. It's kind of hard to tell how far. It's okay? That's great. I'd like to repeat something a little bit differently you've already heard, which is health integrates all of the exposures out there. So when we think about the planetary boundaries, when we think about environmental change, ultimately it's reflected in our bodies. And so we are the integration. The other point that I'd like to bring forward more clearly is one of the key themes at all of the negotiations in the COP is inequities. And those inequities arise from differential exposures, from differential vulnerabilities, reflected through our health. And so we can very clearly use health in the negotiations to say, these are why we're concerned. We've got the evidence around the inequities, what those mean. We've got the evidence for the kinds of actions that need to be taken to make sure that we protect health while reducing inequities. There's lots of challenges in doing this. There's lots of stovepiping in just about any dimension that you can imagine. And it's really important when we're here at this very unifying conference where we've got tens of thousands of people talking about climate change, how to move forward collectively to make our planet, our communities, us as individuals, more resilient to the changes that are ongoing and that are likely to accelerate. And this message needs to get not just to the communities, but it needs to get to the funders, because much of what we do as scientists is constrained by the funders. The funders set boundaries over what you can look at, even though you really need to work with partners. And it's wonderful to see the kinds of efforts that are going on through the Global Climate Alliance, through other efforts to cross these. And so you can have the climatologist, the ecologist, the physiologist, et cetera, sit down together with health people to further that understanding. It's an excellent initiative in the universities, and finding ways to replicate that so that we train students holistically. train our funders holistically so that they are more open to the kinds of research, to the kinds of implementation that we know is needed. And another key barrier, as long as I'm being asked to talk about barriers and thinking about the funding, is around the implementation. We know the most effective implementation is a co-production process. There's not a lot of funders who are willing to invest the money and the time for co-production. And yet we have to do that because otherwise our interventions are not going to be effective. The second part of that challenge is we will never have enough time, enough people, enough resources to work with each and every community. And so as we work with communities, we have to find ways to pull out lessons learned and best practices that are transferable to other communities. We need to scale up rapidly and we need to scale out. And we have to ensure that the work that we do at all levels helps facilitate that because too many communities are suffering too many impacts. And it's urgent that we help them as soon as we can.
Thank you very much for the wonderful answer. And I think my next question is for Dr. Musonda, who is on stage with us. I would like to ask you if you could provide examples of successful initiatives or interventions in the field of planetary health that have positively impacted both human and environmental well-being.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for inviting us as a convention on wetlands. Perhaps I should explain what our convention is about. We are the oldest multilateral environmental agreement, older than UNFCCC, because we're 52 years old. Started in Ramsar in Iran, 172 contracting parties, and so your countries are our contracting parties and member states of the United Nations. Now, what does that mean? That means every single country that joins the convention provides an asset to the convention, and those assets are wetland ecosystems. Diverse, and I loved your picture of that algae bloom, because that is the reality of the planet. We have well over 2,600 Ramsar sites globally. Wendy, your picture that you showed with the changes everywhere, we have wetland sites there. The manifestation, and I want to talk a little bit about the problem before I talk to the successes, the manifestation of our health is mostly through wetlands. I was in Nairobi a few weeks ago for the intergovernmental negotiation process for plastics. I live in Switzerland. But what people don't realize is that on the Swiss Alps, you have to put massive plastic sheets to try and stop the glacier from melting. Those plastic sheets wear out. The Swiss Alps are the birthplace of 5 major rivers of Europe. The 4 main ones, the River Po, the Rhine, the Rhone, and the Danube, are full of microplastics and nanoplastics. And what people don't realize is this element of the things that are finding themselves in our blood. And so the health situation, the things that we don't see, and how they manifest. And you talk about, and I loved, Christy, what you mentioned about educating the funders. I think if you're an earthling and you live on this planet, surely you ought to know how to do better. And the education element is so important, and this is a success. We have many wetland centers in the world, over 300, talking about the power and importance of wetlands. The picture I saw of the clothing, behavior. We're always shopping. I need a new dress, and then I need another new dress. And most of these dresses and things are finding themselves and manifesting in wetland sites somewhere. And this is where the justice issue comes in. What are some of the success elements of our convention? For the first time in the history of the convention, we have wetland city accreditation. People do not realize that having green spaces and water issues on spaces in cities is an important element for your mental well-being. And we have well over 45 cities around the world that have, in Canada, Sackville is one of our cities, our wetland cities that's been accredited. And it's fantastic to really see all of these spaces. Some of the conversations we're also having is in the national reports of the convention, when countries report to the convention for our next conference of the parties, which is happening in 2025, they also indicate those indicators. what are the plastic matrices, what is happening, and then our reports are shared with other MEAs. Because it doesn't make sense that a country is doing double reporting and not sharing some of these elements of information. Then lastly, what I want to mention is next year, World Wetlands Day, which is on the 2nd of February, is wetlands and human well-being. So please go on our website, tell us your stories, tell us your insight anywhere in the world where you are. World Wetlands Day is a UN day. Even the countries that are not contracting parties to our convention also celebrate World Wetlands Day. Lastly, I want to talk about the issue of education in your region, because your region and also Canada, what happened recently, peatlands. Peatlands are the most very well-known wetland systems, and yet this is where the fires manifest, and that's what happened in Canada, that's what happens in Malaysia and Indonesia, and even moving further on to other countries, the smoke. So one of the issues that we're dealing with within the convention is to share how do we re-wet. And thanks to Jane, who used to be the CEO of Wetlands International, lots of work in countries to do that re-wetting. And some of these are some of the really fantastic success stories. And lastly, I want to say the role of women and children. For those of you that may not know, the actual restoration of the Iraqi marshes were done by women. So these are some of the most exciting things to see.
Thank you very much for the wonderful explanation, Dr. Musonda. And before I open questions to the floor, I have an additional question for Dr. Jamila right next to me. Doctor, can you share with me what are the emerging trends or areas of research within planetary health that you find particularly promising or concerning?
Yeah, I think, you know, as you've heard, planetary health is really broad, right? So there's a lot more research now being done on air pollution and planetary health. But one area I think that Wendy and Chrissy also spoke about in the planetary boundaries is the novel entities that is really worrying us. And Musonda mentioned about microplastics. Now, you know, this is a really big problem. Now, for us in Malaysia and in Asia, we have to be aware that Malaysia is the third largest dumper of plastic in oceans. And this is a really bad thing that is happening in our area. So now you know, this is a field that a lot of scientists are now saying we've got to look into the impact of microplastics, because we have no idea how severe the health implications will be. What we do know is that, you know, it will probably lead to cardiovascular diseases and so on and so forth. But for microplastic research, it's very complicated. So we had a meeting with Minduru Foundation that has funded a plastic-free laboratory in Queensland, because you can't do microplastic research in a lab that has plastics. You can't draw blood from a plastic syringe because your results may be affected. Everything we drink has plastics. The air we breathe has plastics. Breast milk that is being passed to babies has plastics. Babies are passing microplastics in feces. It's in us. But we will see the serious health consequences in due time. The other area, of course, is in air pollution. People always assume that air pollution is just with respiratory diseases, but no, it's also cardiovascular disease, diabetes, early onset Alzheimer's is now associated with pollution. Even obesity. So I always say that I'm fat because the air is so bad, you know. So I think that, you know, we've got to take this really seriously. I'm having a lighthearted moment here. So, you know, everything is so connected. But I think one piece of, or rather an area of research we need to develop is bringing the private sector in, right? To say, okay, you are concerned about your business development in this area. We are concerned about that. Where do we meet? How do we work as scientists, as physicians, as communities to look into those areas that maybe you want to expand into and the impact that it will have on the planet and the people, so that, you know, you don't want to be taken to court in future, right? So the EU is already starting to put very strict legislation.
Thank you, Dr. Jamila. I think Professor Christie would like to also continue with that question.
Thank you. I'd like to add something to the list, but to answer the question that you just posed, is industry wants healthy worker and healthy communities. And we do have a place where we meet, and we can build from there. Another risk that crosses most of planetary health is carbon dioxide and what it's doing to plants. 85% of our plants use one photosynthetic pathway to bring in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, metabolize it, take the carbon, and use the carbon to grow. And that particular pathway is very sensitive to rising CO2 concentrations. Based on field experiments with wheat and rice, and by the way, 85% of our plants, wheat, rice, barley, potatoes, trees, grasses, 85% of what's out there. And based on field experiments at a doubling of CO2, protein goes down by 10%. B vitamins go down by 30%. Micronutrients go down by 5%. The 5% sounds small. There's 830 million people in the world who are food insecure. There's 2 billion with micronutrient deficiencies. About 1.5 billion women and girls have iron deficiency anemia. I'm focusing on health. It's affecting livestock. Grass-fed livestock is starting to become more stressed because they're not getting the nutrition they need. And by the way, that nutrition includes iron. And so if you think people can rely on meat to get iron, well, if there's not iron in the meat, people are not going to be getting iron. It's a very complex dynamic, and thinking about how it affects the wetlands, how it affects the productivity of so much of our ecosystems, and then what does that mean? It's just a nascent area of research, but the early numbers are deeply concerning. There was a study of the poorest rice-dependent countries and concluded that a doubling of CO2 would affect about 600 million people. The numbers need to be improved. There needs to be more research, but this is an area where we have to do multidisciplinary research because we don't understand what carbon dioxide, and this is separate from climate change, this is carbon dioxide, and what it's doing to the plant, the animal kingdoms, and to ourselves.
Thank you very much, Professor Christine. I think I would like to open the floor to questions now. If there's anyone interested to ask questions, do raise your hand. Yes, Mr. Niti.
Hi, I'm Niti with Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, as well as Environmental Protection Society Malaysia. I'm from Malaysia. It's been an absolutely fascinating panel and discussion, so congratulations to everyone. In 2007, my society led the introduction of ecological footprint analysis in Malaysia under the Sustainable Living in Malaysia, or SLIM program. So it's living well within the ecological limits of one planet based on ecological footprint analysis. And we also then went on to develop, an institutional framework for mainstreaming sustainability based on living well within the ecological limits of one planet, horizontal integration among all federal government agencies, vertical integration among all three levels of government. So, and the core to addressing the whole issue of ecological overshoot is reducing consumption, frugal abundance, living more with less. I'd just like your comment on the intersection between your work on planetary health, and I really see the integration between those working on environment and climate and health really coming together. So I'd love your comment on how you see an integration between the work going on ecological footprint analysis and planetary health, and how we can all come together. Thank you.
It's interesting, all the conversations you end up having at COP. In the Uber ride I just had to get here, I had quite a long conversation about the fundamental philosophical shift that I think has to underpin a lot of this. I have lived in the majority indigenous part of the world now for about 12 years, and the way the elders talk about the relationship between us and the living world is entirely different than what I was used to. I grew up in Vancouver in Canada. So this notion of relationship, of reciprocity, of humans as part of the living world is just so key, this shift from ego to eco, as they say. And so we were talking about living well. Like, I think that this concept of living well that you were mentioning is really important. What does it mean to live well? Because we've been sold essentially, a consumerist, hedonistic version of a good life. And in order to reduce consumption, we need to change that underlying desire and belief about what it is to live well. So when we're thinking about using carrots instead of sticks to motivate behavioral change, I think there's really something to be said for thinking about a change in narrative that talks about, well, if I'm part of the ecosystem and I'm part of the living world, number one, I get to take care of myself. This was coming up in conversations with youth activists. I'm a family doctor, emergency doctor. Sometimes halfway through COP, I just start doing cognitive behavioral therapy on people because everyone's so stressed out, right? And they feel like they have to work so hard that they can't take care of themselves. Well, the work that you produce when you're in that unhealthy space is never your best work. And what I've found is that if you start to think of yourself as part of nature and your whole drive is to take care of nature, well, you have to take care of the little part of nature you walk around in every day too. And so if you're taking care of yourself and you're operating from a place of thriving, where you're sleeping, you're eating, etc., all of a sudden living well you don't need to buy anything. And so there's all of these different, I think, really fundamental philosophical changes in relationship, in story, and narrative that we need to be bringing into the conversation to then drive the behavior that we want to see in order to be consistent with the data. And I think that storytelling part of it is really interesting.
No, thank you for that question. We're literally eating the planet Earth as we live on, right? I just want to add to your point that and since I'm surrounded by medical doctors, which is really fantastic, I'm so happy that finally we have a health day at the COP, because I've been involved a lot in the climate, not from a negotiation perspective, but listening in, moderating, and just being part of the sessions. And I used to work in the UN. Now, what I want to say is let's have those pictures of what our internal, even just our neurosystem looks like. It looks like rivers. If you think about it, it looks like, right? It looks like rivers. We should have those pictures for people to realize we're 80%, is it 70 or 80% water? 60% and then bones, etc., and all of that. The very fact that there's been a disconnect in how we relate to that, I am part of nature. I'm Zambian and South African, and my ancestral interior and connection talks about holistic being, ubuntu. I am because we are, but that we are is also connected to the natural world. And something dislodged somewhere. And I can tell you for free that for the last decade, it's a massive improvement that we're seeing Indigenous peoples part of these conversations. They were never a part of these conversations. And I'm glad that they're here because they have warned us for a long time. Something is coming. Your behavior is problematic for Mother Earth.
I think to address your question, you asked specifically about how does this relate, ecological health with planetary health. I will be the first to say that the health professionals are quite ignorant about planetary health, right? Only 15% of medical schools are teaching climate and health. So Courtney and I are on a rampage now to revolutionize this, right? So, how do you then expect people to know when your doctor or your nurse doesn't tell you that, maybe your hypertension is related to air pollution, right? Or the reason why, you are getting more infections is as a result of global warming. So I think that planetary health tries to put that health lens very clearly on the damage that is happening on the planet. The other thing is shifting patterns of disease. So, it's easy to talk about vector-borne. We've just come out of a pandemic. That's a classic planetary health crisis, right? And for example, in North America, in Washington, D.C., they reported the first case of malaria in someone who never traveled out of Washington, D.C. There is now dengue in Texas. We are going to get more of these tropical diseases moving to temperate climates because of the patterns of disease. The glaciers are melting, and God knows how many thousands of viruses and microbes are being released, which we have no idea what the pathogenesis is. So planetary health puts that lens on it to say that if you continue to damage the planet by the choices that you make, because of the era of the Anthropocene, the epoch of the Anthropocene, it's us that's making those choices, then there are going to be serious health consequences. So I think that's where, the coming together is important. It's a very overarching theme, and we just need to work together. This is where I'm going to say it here. We all have to leave our egos at the door, right? We have a crisis, and we stop flying our flags. So what we need to do is say we have cousin concepts. We come together as a family. We solve the problem.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamila. Do we have more questions from the floor?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamila. Thank you, everybody, for a fantastic panel. I'm so proud as a Malaysian born to be sitting in this pavilion listening to you talking about planetary health. So, yes, I'm working with you at your invitation on the communication and behavior pillar of the National Planetary Health Action Plan. And the thing that interests me with planetary health as a frame, as a rhetoric, as a policy frame, is that there are two ways forward. One is the human-centered way, which will catch people's attention because they're worried about their jobs, their health, their children. And it's to say, okay, look, the planet matters because it'll affect you and your health. But that's still a human-first, anthropocentric discourse. The second way echoes what Courtney, Dr. Howard said about how, and also what Dr. Mumba said about how actually you can put forward a different, braver, ecocentric discourse that says we're all part of an ecosystem, we're all part of the biosphere, and that means planetary health is the health of the biosphere, the health of humans, the health of non-humans, all together. You cannot separate them. We're all in this, and for good or bad, what we do affects the planet with all its feedback loops, and what we do is affecting us. That's the plastic that has come back to haunt us. So I'm interested in your response as I grapple myself. Do we go with the less courageous, hey, let's talk about humans, and then we'll sneak in the ecocentric through the back door? Or let's go all out and remind people first and foremost that this is an ecological discourse. So what do you think as a panel?
It's an excellent question. The answer comes down to whatever works with the audience. And you really have to know your audience and know what works. And what you didn't talk about is something we have to talk about a lot more, is misinformation. And so it's not just conveying information. There's decades of social science research showing that people don't really respond to new knowledge. It's what their family and friends think about, what they hear about, their sources of information. And there's growing disinformation, and how to effectively counter that. And it's not by a scientist standing up and saying, here's what the science says. There's other mechanisms involving the non-scientific community that needs to step forward and be much more proactive in that disinformation to make sure that what we know is effectively communicated And you think about so many audiences. I'm a scientist. There's many audiences where really the best spokesperson's not a scientist. It's much better to get someone to come and tell the stories, someone to come and talk about their individual experience. Evidence-based, but it doesn't have to be a scientist. Art, music. There's so many different ways that we can communicate, and we need to partner with all of them. One of the great joys I had last year was partnering with a rapper who does only science-based raps that are all peer-reviewed. And he's Canadian, he's Bubba Brinkman, and he's got a brilliant rap on the health benefits of mitigation policies. I'm biased, but it is quite a good rap. And all the kinds of opportunities for those partnerships to, as you said, move our egos aside and making sure it's the right spokesperson for the right event, to bring forward something that will be motivating. And it may not be me with pie charts.
Definitely.
I love the rapping bit. Wow, peer-reviewed. I would love to listen to his music and check it out. I just want to mention, and it's a really fantastic question. I just want to share a story of a woman who I was supposed to meet when I used to work for the United Nations Environment Program. And she's a documentary maker who's from China. And she did a documentary saying, have you seen the blue sky? Because apparently there are parts of China where children have never seen the blue sky. And it was interesting because it was a personal story for her, because her unborn child suddenly had a brain tumor. So the personal stories of many individuals are also beginning to bring to the fore the very planetary health dynamic, as Jamila mentioned. And I think for me, the power of storytelling is also a game changer. That comes then into the shift of the policy dynamic. Look at what's happened in the UK and also in the EU with forever chemicals. People didn't even know, what are these forever chemicals? I mean, these things are lasting in systems for life. We don't even know whether they're in our soaps, they're in what, and it's individuals that said, you know what, my unborn child is sick, even before they see the planet. And that really changes the shift in community. And I just want to add a little bit on the issue of disinformation. It's scary. It's absolute. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she comes and tells me, Mama, you know what I heard? And now she's shifting between English and French. I'm just overwhelmed because she's, having been born in Africa, she had a different set of dynamics and information sources coming into Switzerland. And she's like, oh yeah, but you know, my friends are saying that this situation here with air pollution, this is a lie, Mama. And I'm thinking, where are her friends getting the source of information? And we really have to make sure that even the schools where our children are going in, the sources of information that relate to health, to climate and all of that is genuine. And I think that's why I love, congratulations on your universities, the mandatory nature of making sure that even doctors are learning about climate-related science, and well done. Go the forth and make sure that the world changes, because we need it. We need it.
I just wanted to quickly, just in response to that question, Jamila and I we're lucky to work with a really wonderful Dene Indigenous scholar named Dr. Nicole Redvers. And you can imagine planetary health, the definition wasn't easy to come up with. And the first version of it was the health of human civilization and the state of the natural systems upon which it depends. So a very, very anthropocentric definition. And she came in, she's like, no. And so we've had so many conversations about this, and I think it really comes down, for me, I think her definition is more correct, like a more ecocentric definition is more correct, but it doesn't speak to every audience. And so I essentially change the definition depending on who I'm talking to, but I do honor that point of view, because I think fundamentally that's a shift we really need to make. And one of the people at the discussion this morning was the head of the World Federation of PR Professionals. And I went and I got his email. Because those are the people we need to talk to. We haven't. And imagine, that's all they do all day is figure out how to sell things to people. That's not what I learned how to do. You know, let's go talk to them.
Yes. Mic, please. Muaz?
Thank you very much, Lavanya from WWF Malaysia. And a really fascinating panel and fascinating questions as well that you continue to answer in a very amazing way. I just wanted to carry on with this conversation about disinformation. I think one of the major disinformation that we are all operating under is what GDP delivers to us. And, you know, that's been the narrative that partly, I feel, the root cause of where we are today. And now we are hearing encouraging, you know, discourse on going beyond GDP. The Secretary General of the UN has called for that. I just want to get your views on, you know, planetary health and how we can push that, because I think until we do that, we still hear that, you know, we need to continue doing what we are doing. We need to make the money because the money will solve all these problems, including the health problems that you described, but it's not doing it. Thank you.
Let me try. So I knew you would ask that, Lavanya. I think that there is a strong move towards, I think, first of all, Wendy's first slide, where she showed the, you know, the growth patterns, that's the chase for GDP versus the impact on Earth systems. And that's what's happened when you only look at growth. So there is a growing movement that's calling for much more well-being economies, right? You've heard of Kate Raworth's donut economics, Mariana Mazzucato, you know, all the other models, and Courtney studied with Kate. And I think we've got to make that more popular, but that requires strong leadership and courage, because people are competing against each other on GDP growth and saying, oh, you know, my country's GDP is higher than yours. But is your country's GDP that is higher than our, no one's looked at the triple bottom line. What is the impact on nature? What's the impact on biodiversity? What's the impact on people? So what is the cost? So to give you an example, you know, donut economics is being piloted in many cities around the world. Malaysia has adopted it in Ipoh. It's the first Asian city to try it out, right? And it was not easy, right, to convince the municipality. But if we can put a dollar sign, when you buy something, it's not just that cost. There's a cost to transport it to where you are. There's a cost to the packaging and everything else. And you will realize that everything is much more expensive than what it is. So I think that, you know, this is the kind of discussions that our political leadership needs to listen to. You know that, for example, Costa Rica, you know, made a decision to focus on environment and so on and so forth. Bhutan, you know, stopped looking at GDP. Even in UAE, there's a Ministry of Happiness and all that. So how do we now look at what does living well mean? Does it mean getting more money, or really having a better quality of life? One where, you know, you want, for me, it's wanting for others what you want for yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamila. Anyone wants to add on?
I think you're absolutely right. And for me, it's a little bit about internal consistency too. And it does work, I think, from a narrative standpoint. Like if we know we need to start with being well on the individual level, and that will require our family to also be well and the planet to also be well, a well-being frame for all of it is the thing that makes the most sense. So I was lucky last year. I spent a bunch of last year reading about this and researching it. And a lot of countries are actually making pretty good progress. You know, New Zealand, Wales, Scotland, and Canada, even on the down low, came up with a quality of life framework. They didn't tell anyone. They just started publishing it alongside the budget on the, I'm like, why didn't you tell anybody? And I think it's because they still don't feel like they've got the social license to really start talking about it. So we're actually inspired by Jamila starting to think about starting an NGO in Canada really designed to really provide the narrative and the push to the policymakers to give them the ability to take that next step and start to use it in budgeting the way they are in New Zealand. But we've had so much help this year from that new paper, the Beyond GDP paper by the UN, as well as the WHO Council on the Economics of Health for All with Mariana Mazzucato and Kate Raworth. So I feel like as sort of peri-academic humans, we have
we have enough support. There's enough structure. It's moved into the mainstream enough that we can really start pushing, and I really think we need to integrate that into this conversation.
I'll just add a quick comment because you mentioned Costa Rica, and I was there this February, and I think the manifestation of those changes, the change in thinking, is that Costa Rica is the one country where I went to this February, where every single corner I visited, I went to the Gulf of Nicoya, I went to Colorado, which is a tiny little town, and there's a sign in every hotel, in every bathroom, that you can drink the water from the tap. It's between Guatemala and other countries. It's smack, and that is leadership. Because that kind of leadership of thinking, what is living well? Living well is a healthy and planetary health, and making sure that that connection is whole. And I asked Andrea, who is the deputy executive secretary at UNCCD. She's Costa Rican and used to be the Minister of Environment for Costa Rica. I said, Andrea, how were you able to do this? She said, one, we don't have a military. And then two, we make sure that everybody in the country gets an education.
Thank you very much for the fantastic questions from the floor. A round of applause for all our speakers here on stage. I think before I wrap up this session and hand on over to Tan Sri Jamila, I think the key takeaway from this entire conversation is simple. Human well-being is very much reliant on the health of our planet. And coming from my personal experience reporting news in Malaysia, I've covered multiple haze situations in Kuala Lumpur and beyond. I've personally seen an 8-year-old boy who had to pull himself out of school, and he could not go to school for the next year because his bronchitis got really, really bad, which led to his mom losing her job because of the air pollution, and she had to stay home and take care of him. And I think my final say for this matter involving planetary health is I'm going to share a very interesting indigenous knowledge where my mother comes from. I'm part Dusun, I'm part indigenous from Borneo. So there is this saying called Gompi Guno. Gompi Guno literally translates to use, but to preserve. So if you were to use something in a forest, leave behind some for the next generation. Do not ravage all of it. So I think that can be applied in terms of maintaining that we still have an earth to live on in the next 20 to 30 years to come. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers here on stage. Thank you very much to this wonderful set of women who is inspiring and are doing wonderful, wonderful things, especially to you, Dr. Jamila. Happy birthday again. And thank you. Thank you for the wonderful work you do at Sunway Center for Planetary Health. A round of applause again for our wonderful women on stage. And I hand over to Dr. Jamila Mahmood.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Ushar, our really amazing moderator today. While the BCG team clears the chairs a little bit, let me share that this panel wouldn't have happened without my co-conspirator, Jane Madgwick. And Jane is the executive director of the Global Commons Alliance. And we met in New York and sat on the sidewalk and started talking about what we want to do together. And thank you so much to the government of Malaysia for providing us the pavilion for us to have this wonderful panel. I'm so, so proud that we are taking this very seriously. We're going to have a closing remark from Jane on behalf of all of us. And at the end of it, I just beg your patience to watch a very short video clip and to announce that Malaysia will be hosting the Planetary Health Summit and 6th annual meeting in Kuala Lumpur at Sunway University on 16th to 19th of April 2023. It is the first time, 24, it's the first time that the Planetary Health Summit is coming to Asia, and the first time, that is held face-to-face in the Global South. So all the things you heard will be discussed there. We will be in partnership with many organizations, as well as the World Economic Forum, because we want to bring these discussions to life. We may have rappers, we'll definitely have cartoonists, and we will address planetary health and communications in so many different ways. So over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Jamila, and wonderful to see a great audience here. And unfortunately, I came in partway through, but it was a very, very rich discussion. Sometimes you have an idea, and it turns into a beautiful thing. Everything falls into place. Ding, 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 ding. This was one of those things, with these women coming together for this event, Jamila arranging this pavilion, and I think the mix of speakers was perfect for the subject. I'm pretty sure that when Wendy spoke, she will have mentioned safe and just horizons and how all the different sectors, how we need collective action really to get there. And I think this topic is really at the heart of that. And as was said, health is really an indicator. It can really say a lot about how we are living in this planet, and it can bring the environmental and social sciences together. And I think this is super powerful. Here we can really find synergy. So I'm so happy that the Earth Commission and the Planetary Health Alliance, through the Global Commons Alliance, is really coming together, and hoping that this will not just be about the narrative. It certainly will be more about the storytelling, but I hope it can also lead to some joint actions. So I'm really excited to join the Planetary Health Summit in April in Malaysia and with some colleagues to take this forward. I could say a lot more, but I won't, because I think enough of good quality has been said in this session. I would really like to thank Usha for leading the session so well, and for all these ladies, Jamila, Musonda, Wendy, Courtney, Christy, and Aditi as well, for making this such a positive event. It's just the beginning, I think, of what will come from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. To our speakers, don't run away because we're going to take a group photo, but can we have the video up now, please, and the volume up?
Climate change is literally killing us daily. And so this is a fight for our health. It's a fight for our survival. It's a fight for our well-being.
If we ignore climate change and health, then we're actually ignoring the most important part of the climate crisis.
There's a growing argument that we shouldn't be measuring the impact of climate change through degrees Celsius, but in lives lost.
The whole concept of planetary health is that it's all interlinked and it's all interconnected. The society has really lived in a way that has not looked at its relationship with the planet, with the environment. If health of human civilization and humanity is central to our survival, then we have to recognize that close link with the health of the planet. Biodiversity is very much linked with our health and our existence. What happened when we were all going through a pandemic? It happened because we have damaged the environment, we've damaged the planet, we've created opportunities for zoonotic leaks, and so we suffered. 75% of the determinants of health are social, environmental, behavioral, and oftentimes we forget that those drivers are also very much dependent on equity, on values, the way we develop economies, the way we function as societies, the way we consume. It requires us to rethink how we live. What is the economy we want? Is it one that is perpetually based on growth, or is it one that's focused on well-being? Equity is also central for people to live in a way that allows them to achieve their full potential without damage to the planet. For humanity to thrive, we need the planet to thrive as well. If we get it right, we have clean air, we have clean water, we will have the ability to really enjoy life to the best of our ability. to enjoy the nature that surrounds us, and to thrive as human beings.
Ladies, I would like to invite all the moderators, speakers, and all parties involved to the center stage for photography sessions. I would like to invite all the moderators.